So Richard, thanks for coming. We've been working together with ZenCargo since 2018, and since we started working together, how's it gone, do you think?
No, I mean, you know, what's brilliant about the partnership with THG is that you guys have been on an incredible journey since we started working together, and so have we. So we've very much grown together as a business. I think you had a little bit of a head start on us. We started the business in 2017. I think, it's fair to say you took a risk on ZenCargo when we were kind of a fledgling young business, but I think it's been an incredible partnership. And the key to the partnership has really been that you've given us a chance to really learn about your business and to really become, a true partner. And slowly over time, we've picked up, more and more of the intricacies of the problems you have all over the world, being a global business. And today, I think it's a really special partnership.
You are different to all the other freight forwarders that we do work with, because you've arguably, in a way, trying to digitalize it and move into a more seamless way of moving cargo from A to B, right? But giving us transparency in certain layers where maybe we don't get it from some other freight forwarders.
I think the biggest challenge, particularly for businesses in consumer retail who have a lot of different items that they're moving from a lot of different factories around the world, is blind spots when it comes to data and being able to take action on those blind spots. So if you don't know where your goods are in your supply chain and you don't know the options that you have, you can't make decisions. And ultimately what that means is stockouts, less availability, higher costs, and more inefficiency in your supply chain. And the way that we came at it was more from the perspective of how do you optimize the key drivers in your business? How do you sell as much as you can at the lowest cost? How do you have the right stuff in the right place at the right time? For us, the blocker to that was being connected to your supply chain. So that means connected to factories, connected to the ships so we understand when things are going to arrive, connected to the planes, connected to your warehouse, because slot availability in the warehouse can be a problem. And so our thesis was, let's get the best at providing visibility into those blind spots across our customers' whole supply chain. And if we can do that, we can drive better decision making and we can drive better outcomes for the customer. And the customer will be very happy for that. And that's really been the approach. And I think we started off on a journey from the factories in Asia all the way through, to how do we integrate better with the vessels and the planes, to how do we integrate with our customers' warehouse. And we've been on that journey. And now the most interesting thing for the business is the developments that we've seen in AI and these LLMs that have come out in the last year.
Yeah, massively. I mean, obviously, AI has been around for a long time, right? And people now use it in podcasts or articles or blogs or whatever, just as buzzwords. But for the supply chain, I think it's incredibly important, to the point where even this morning, there's levels of the merchandising function in our business, there's levels of the B2B retail function in our business, where they're still heavily using tools like Excel. Excel now feels like, really 1990s, it was the tool of the day. And it feels like it's phasing itself out, of course. But what we therefore then need is a business analyst and architect to go in and understand how to streamline every single one of these processes, not just to take cost out, but to increase speed and increase service to the customers that now we're serving. So even today I had that conversation because there's still layers of our business that have not been touched, for years, and therefore not been scaled. So what we don't want to do is continually just add headcount, because that's just expensive. What we want to do is provide an amazing service, but a really slick one that provides the transparency. So it reduces the number of contacts to us from a end consumer or, let's say, a brand who we're serving, their goods for, fulfillment and courier management services for. So in terms of the common pain points, what do you see amongst customers relying on legacy freight forwarders? And how are you helping to address that with ZenCargo?
So, I mean, if you start all the way when an order gets raised in a factory in China, if you imagine someone's ordering their packaging and they're bringing it into the UK for the end product and they've got some specialized product that goes to market, that whole life cycle of ordering the product, getting it ready, going through QC and sampling, getting it onto a vessel and getting it into the UK can take months. Often as much as 6 months for the whole end-to-end process. And during that period, there are so many blind spots and points in time when the team loses visibility of what's going on. And really where we've been able to differentiate is to be able to ingest data at the point of which, as you said, buying or a merchandising team want to make an order, wherever it is, to a factory. Oftentimes those factories are not the most digital first. They might have 100 factories around the world, all of which themselves they're working on spreadsheets, often in different languages to the ones in which the person making the order speaks. And basically taking that whole process and bringing it into one seamless workflow and ensuring that when the cargo needs to move, it moves at the right speed, on the right vessel. It doesn't go in a container with a bunch of empty air in the container, that it fills the container. It moves at the right speed. And then when it gets to the UK or the US or the Netherlands, wherever it needs to go, that it's the first, if it's urgent, it's the first container off the ship. If it can wait, okay, something else gets prioritized. I mean, it's really about helping customers make those decisions.
So when you talk about visibility, it's critical now, isn't it? And arguably it's become an expectation from us using providers like yourselves. We just demand visibility, right? We just do. But it's not always available, and I appreciate that, because even I don't have the visibility of literally everything in my business just yet. But what are the consequences for businesses who don't have that visibility in your world for brands like ourselves?
I think it really goes down to three things. It's revenue, and we can call that availability of stock. It's working capital, and we've seen that in a extreme way through COVID, where people were short of stock. We shipped a lot of air fryers during COVID for various companies, and they were the hugest fad. Everyone decided that
you got one.
They were locked in. I think I do, but I think it's away in a cupboard somewhere. Apologies to anyone who makes air fryers. But suddenly products were the new fad and they needed to be in market. And then, of course, things opened up with COVID and people were massively overstocked. But it's working capital, and then of course it's cost. And with cost, there's a dollar cost, dollar and cents, but also sustainability. Is the other side of cost. And in the main, when customers don't have visibility, it's driving a direct impact to those three things. Whether that's
for brands, cost can be looked at in so many different ways, right? So you've got cost of the direct cost of manufacturing, moving the goods. I think containers went up to something like 20 grand a pop at one point during COVID. It's crazy, 20 times the cost it normally would be, maybe more. And what you're doing is, if you're not geographically enabled or enabled via partners like yourselves, is you're losing customers, and that equals cost. That's taking revenue off the top line, it's taking profit out the bottom immediately. And then whilst you're doing that, it's costing us even more to serve the rest of the customers. So having the right partners for us is absolutely critical. And our brands now that we serve demand that from us. Therefore, I'm getting it from you, and I'm getting it from, the brand direction at the same time now as well. So then you've gone and built a lot of smart stuff, like, we'll use the word AI. So you've called it Luca as well, this platform, is that right?
We liked the idea of giving our AI agent, who is going to have increasingly amazing capabilities, a human name, because at the end of the day, supply chain is very much a people business, and we want to celebrate kind of the human qualities of our team and people in supply chain. But actually, we really needed a name which works universally, works in all languages, can be pronounced easily in China, and is short enough that people can remember it. So I don't know if there's any great secret other than that. Plus, there's a good Disney movie called Luca that my kids like. So.
Yeah? Why did you build it? Who's building it? And what? I suppose it's not fully built either, right?
Sure.
Nothing's ever fully...
So nothing's ever finished at ZenCargo, which is kind of the bane of our lives here. But look, we've been building technology specifically in the supply chain since day one. Everything that we build at ZenCargo is built in-house by the ZenCargo team. The capabilities with large language models really just kind of have opened up our ability to kind of realize a lot of the vision that we originally had when we said we want to build a world with smarter trade. Because a big part of the challenge in supply chain is that you're dealing with disparate systems. A lot of the data is in documents. There's a lot of communication in different languages. You're working in different time zones around the world, and you need to be able to get back to people very quickly. And so what Luca has the capability to do is, first of all, to understand the context of supply chain. So to understand what is the best way of moving an air freight shipment from China to the UK? what are all the steps involved? What are all the documents involved? What is the best way to move ocean freight from Indonesia to the US? And Luca has that context built into his DNA. And then we're giving Luca different capabilities. So today, Luca has a handful of capabilities that are live with customers. Everything from being able to interact with a factory around the world and understand when goods are going to be ready. He can speak dozens of languages. He can understand exceptions. He can update everyone in the supply chain when dates change. And that is incredibly useful for making sure things get planned on time. To when cargo arrives in the destination, he can organize slots with warehouses and orchestrate trucks. To even customs clearance, he's live with a capability to read documents, whether that's commercial invoices or packing lists or bills of lading, understand them, convert that into the data needed to clear customs, and to clear customs automatically. And we do have human layers that basically look at a subset of our data and ensure that Luca is always behaving at the highest accuracy and up to the kind of data standards that we require. But in the main, Luca is already proving incredibly enabling for our teams and our customers, and he's freeing up people in our team to look at more complex projects for our customers.
And what makes it different then, your platform, to some that already exist today?
I would say that the majority of freight forwarders in the market, their own internal operating system is a third-party system. And
Right.
actually most of the world, 80% of the freight forwarders out there use the same system, which is an Australian company that built the system. ZenCargo have built a system that we use for our own operations, which is the same system that we offer to our customers. And so our whole operations are built based on our customer needs, and that's really quite different to competitors in the market, where they really take care of their own operations. They use what is a widely adopted system for their own operations, and then kind of as a separate piece, they think about how to build software for their customers.
Yeah. So if I imagine the supply chain as kind of a set of boxes, and each one of them is a dependency, what deployments have you made within your platform now that kind of streamlines elements of those that supply chain itself? What have you deployed within the platform that's now made it easier?
We've very much focused from the moment a purchase order is raised until cargo gets back into a warehouse, wherever that is in the world. So that means at the front end, we've tried to make it as easy as possible to ingest product and order data from customers. Mm-hmm. And then within what we call purchase order management, we've tried to set up rules that are built into the system to understand what the optimal way the customer wants to operate is. So if, for example, you have a quality control process, or goods need to be consolidated into a warehouse around the world, we can understand all of that nuance. In the middle, there's the transport layer. So what is the ultimate, what is the optimal way to move cargo around the world? Is it by rail? Is it by ocean? How urgent is this cargo, and what decision needs to be made around that? And within that, there's a layer that looks at how do you best consolidate cargo into a container? What are the opportunities to bring it together? And then at destination, we've very much focused on how do you orchestrate customs and organize deliveries to warehouses in the most efficient way possible. So where we've really focused is between the factories, the conversation with the factories, and then downstream up to the warehouse.
And forgive me if you don't know the answer to this, because it's just popped into my mind now, but if we were going through COVID again today, and we worked very, very closely together during that time, what would you be able to do differently versus then?
I think the first thing is that, hindsight is 20/20, but with the knowledge that we have today, I think the first thing we would say is the most important thing you can do is to react, but not overreact to changes in lead time. And I think where interestingly, we've been much more effective with customers this time around versus with COVID, is if we look at the closure of the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels and the cargo ships going around the Cape of Good Hope. I would then say, just like in terms of technology, the AI that we've developed means that the number of decisions that you had to make over thousands of containers and thousands of shipments would be really very much more efficient.
Yeah, I asked that because you just have to be overly cautious these days in case anything else like that ever happens again.
I mean, it does. I mean, so this year we've had, our fair share. Last year was the closure of the Red Sea, and this year it's been the Trump tariffs. And with the Trump tariffs, we had a period where the Americans immediately stopped shipping because they didn't know what tariff they would be paying out of different origins, and then they started shipping again. And so, that's had a significant knock-on effect.
And then there's a load of containers on the water at the same time as decisions are being made as well, right? So then you've got congestion at port and people don't know what to do with the cargo at that time.
100%. And, even complexity within the rules. Is it when it departed from the port or is it when it's going to arrive?
And do you help brands with that sort of level of consultation in terms of insight and stuff as well? Because we work with a lot of brands, right, that don't have that level of insight and rely on maybe businesses like yourselves to help them.
100%. So what's amazing about retail is that very quickly, even if you're a smaller brand, you get into hundreds and thousands of SKUs. And when you start operating in more than one market, which it's increasingly easy to do, you can suddenly turn on the Middle East or turn on the US, you're suddenly dealing with, dozens of different markets, hundreds of SKUs, and in an environment with tariffs, that's a lot of considerations. So one of the things that we do for those customers is to take their product catalog and really help them to understand what is the fully landed cost in different markets and how do they need to price their products accordingly. And, does it make sense to move via ocean or via air in certain markets? Does it make sense to have a 3PL in certain markets or to fulfill directly from another country? So that's a big part of the consultation that we do with customers. And obviously the world is becoming increasingly complex with what's going on with Trump.
When you talk about the internationalization and you can explode in terms of SKUs in one geography versus the other, it's one of the reasons why we built Checkout as a Service, quite simply because the level of operational enablement we need in your area and the transparency we need in your area, you also need the enablement from a payment perspective and the transparency of what you're paying, etc., and make that transaction seamless. We built that over the last 20 years, but we never externalized that. Now we've externalized it, and now we can be merchant of record, and we can do all of this for other brands and also use your service at the same time. So we're inviting more people into our ecosystem because it actually probably would save you the integration time working with them. If they're in our estate, then ultimately we're pushing more volume through you. So that product, we've just externalized itself very recently as well. How does innovation directly translate into better service in general for your customers?
At the end of the day, our customers care about their customers. And so, for us in building the business, the first thing is to understand what is our customer's customer promise, what do they care about, what are the, what's driving the economics of their business. But for the vast majority of people that I talk to, they have a customer first approach to their supply chain strategy. And so, for us, whether it's visibility and the improvements in our AI to understand lead times or arrival dates with more accuracy, or it's consolidating containers and reducing the air in them, there's a direct impact which drives customer satisfaction. That might be end customer availability, so whether they can get a parcel quicker to their door. It might be unit cost. Can our customer be the lowest price in the market? That might be about them having the best range and assortment, because range and assortment can really kill a business if you explode on SKU count. How can you do that in a thoughtful way? Oftentimes, customers will come to us and they'll say, I need to have better stock availability in market. I need to have stock closer to the customer. How do I flow my goods around the world to different distribution centers to make sure they're closer to the customer so I can win in an increasingly competitive marketplace?
And can you be intrusive with that service as well? Could you arguably can you incubate yourself into a business and look at their supply chain themselves and then advise exactly what their buying structure should be? Do you go that deep, or does it just start with I need?
No, 100%. I mean, so for some of our customers, we have an implant in the customer, and they're there multiple days a week, and what they're supporting with is that they're supporting with some of those buying and merchandising decisions. They're supporting with whether it's more important to expedite something to market, or whether it can, whether it can go into a consolidation center and it can be delivered later. And the other side of that is obviously understanding the workflows and the optimization that a customer can make in their supply chain. And increasingly, customers come to us and say, we actually need an AI partner. I mean, you were talking to this earlier. You gave the example of going around the operations team and talking to some of the buyers and saying, look, this process in Excel doesn't make sense for us. We're spending days crunching a spreadsheet. A lot of what we're doing today is going to customers and saying, talk to me about your processes and talk to me about how AI can support. Now, 7 times out of 10, the problem that they have is going to be common across our customers, so we can help multiple customers at the same time. But increasingly, with the way the technology is going, you can actually also build solutions that are quite unique for individual customers very quickly. And that's incredibly powerful. And it's actually a change in the way the trends in software development are happening. So we had a big period in the 2000s that were all about software as a service.
Yeah.
And it was about you building a user interface which was the easiest to use, which increasingly was sort of dumbed down. So you went from applications like Salesforce for CRM to ones like HubSpot, which is kind of an easy to use CRM. What we're seeing now with agentic AI is that you can actually offer much more bespoke solutions that take a customer's existing workflow and automate that with an agent and deliver a lot of value. And we're seeing value in doing that with inbound supply chain management, with international warehouse transfer.
Customer first supply chain, what does that look like in the future for you?
So I think that there's definitely going to be winners and losers in our industry and also in the retail industry. And we've said this, since starting the business. We looked at Amazon and we said, "Wow, what these guys doing is what these guys are doing is amazing." They're, taking all these smart people, out of consulting, and they're bringing them into their business, and they're finding different ways of, managing the operations of thousands of SKUs, and they're getting them to people in 1 or 2 days. With Amazon Prime, this is going to really disrupt the market, and we've seen everyone else, trying to follow in different ways. And if that's, if that smaller niche brands have been able to do that successfully, working with e-commerce platforms like yourselves, and larger businesses have been re-platforming their old operations, and they've said, okay, well, we need to have a direct-to-consumer part, we might want to have a marketplace part, but we need to be digital first. Maybe not digital only, because stores have given them a real presence. And I still think that there are going to be winners and losers, and the new wave of winners and losers are going to be those who adopt agentic AI and more intelligence in their business, and those who don't. And then obviously the key to retail and consumer business is always going to be brand and positioning and people wanting your product. So it's not only about having an efficient business and working with people like us, it's also about having a product that people want, but you're going to have to marry those two things. And you're going to have to both have a product that people want in the market and also be able to serve them efficiently.
So from a new brand that doesn't use ZenCargo today, why would they choose you over a traditional player or other players in the market? What's the differentiator to choose you?
So when we talk to a business, if you imagine they're in cosmetics or in fashion or in luxury, packaging, wherever they are, there's normally a very clear referenceable case study where we can say to that business, this is another business that we worked with that had similar challenges to you. They had dozens of factories in China. They had challenges with understanding when things were going to be ready. They weren't able to consolidate. Oftentimes, they were moving things out of the same factory a few days apart. This is how much air freight they were using, and we've managed to cut that by 50%. This is what was going on with their CO2 footprint. There will always be a value use case in working with ZenCargo, and oftentimes, we just need a conversation to understand where is the pain. Where is the pain in their process? Where is the pain in the connectivity that they have to their factories around the world? And then, the other thing that they'll have experienced pain in is actually moving the cargo. So whether that's getting on a ship on time, using the right level of air freight service, and we'll be able to design a process which makes sense for them in that regard as well. So, it's one thing to offer someone a solution in ocean freight. It's another thing to align service levels that make sense and deliver for them in a volatile ocean environment. So I would say that if a new customer comes to us and is thinking about jumping on board, we very much will be able to, point to a similar business that we've offered a solution for, where we've delivered tangible outcomes.
Us, right? So it's only fair for me to answer the same question, I guess, is, at a time when you'd founded the business the year before we started working with you. I mean, for a business of our size at that time, that's still a punt in a way, but we saw you having the nimbleness and capability that others didn't have at that time. And then since then, from 2018 to 2025, 7 years later, you've then gone and built your platform. You've given us levels of transparency we don't see in other freight forwarders. So, and if we do have a problem, then we have a bunch of people, including yourself, primarily yourself, who we go to say, look, we've got a couple of problems. Can you come in and take a look at this? And you've provided multiple services since then. So it's only fair for me to answer the same question, but you've been great for us for the last 7 or 8 years, and long may that continue.
Well, I really appreciate it. That's very kind of you to say.